Thanks, everyone. I'll try and keep it moving and snappy, seeing as though it's post-lunch and you've all just eaten and I know what time it is. My name's Jordan. I am an automatician. I've been at Automatic for about a year now. Prior to that, I was working freelance for about 10 or 11 years building WordPress sites for clients. I worked with a lot of churches and other religious organisations doing everything from initial consultation and design through custom development of themes and plugins and support and everything end to end. Then about a year ago, I joined Automatic. I work with them as a happiness engineer on the WordPress.com sites. So I work with users of those sites, helping them to get their site up and running, troubleshooting problems for them, all sorts of different bits and pieces. It ranges from really kind of low-level sales stuff through to quite technical domain management stuff and really kind of debugging of plugin errors and that kind of thing. So you could say I've spent a bit of time fixing sites for people. So that's the basic gist of it. It's really quite wide-ranging. I can have a day where everything is quite simple, and then I'll have days where I'm racking my brain and asking for help because things aren't talking correctly. Yesterday I had someone who was trying to integrate Stripe payments with their site, which should just work, and it does just work for like 99.9% of people, but for this one case, it didn't work, and I was the lucky person who got to try and figure that out. The answer is we're still figuring it out. But yeah, basically I get to troubleshoot what goes wrong with people's sites. They come to me either over email or in chat, and the first thing I have to do is figure out what the problem is. You don't all have access to happiness engineers to do that for you, but I'm hoping that I can teach you all a few tips to kind of do that troubleshooting stage of things. It's not going to tell you what the fix is necessarily, but it's going to narrow down what the problem is, which will help inform you of what you need to do as a next step. The first thing, something's gone wrong. First thing you want to do is back up your site. Now, I'm hoping that most of you are doing this already. Ideally, you've already got a backup that's been taken regularly, so when something's gone wrong, you've got a fallback you can go back to. Even if you haven't, it's time to do one right now. When you're troubleshooting, you might be turning some things on and off, you might be changing some settings. It's always good to have a snapshot of this point in time that you can go back to, just in case you make things worse. I recommend using Updraft Plus. It's a free plugin. It's really great. It can do backups on demand. You can also schedule them, I think, as well. But in this instance, something goes wrong. If you can get access to your WP admin to actually do it, then take a backup straight away. And then the next trick is to figure out what the problem is. Now, you've probably been you've added a plugin, you've changed a setting, you've tried to publish something, and something's gone wrong. That's all a little bit vague. I've learned that when someone comes into chat or to email with me and says, my site's not working, it can mean everything to some kind of fatal PHP error that has taken down the whole site and they can't access it all, through to someone who's got a spelling mistake on their homepage and they're freaking out because there's an extra A in the word. So when I get those kinds of chats, there's a few questions that I roll through to try and narrow into what the heart of the actual problem is in order to start figuring out what's causing it. So the first one I ask what page they're on. I ask, essentially, where were you when the problem happened? Were you in WP admin? Were you in a setting for a plugin? Were you editing a page or a post? Or were you on the front end of the site viewing it? Where were you when it happened? What were you trying to do? What was the action that you took when the problem happened? So we're narrowing down when things happen. So if it happened when you loaded the site, great, we know that's happening probably for everyone. But if it happened when you took an action, like changed a setting or published a post, it narrows it down a little bit further. Next, I ask, what did they think would happen? If you took an action, what was your expectation? That the post would save, that the setting would save, that something would look different on the front end and it doesn't, which is the next thing. What actually happened? You were here, you did something, you expected this to happen, but what was the actual result? So as we drill in with these kinds of questions, you start to actually really clearly define what the problem is. For me, when I'm doing it for someone else, it's super helpful for me to have that defined. But for you, it just helps to actually think about what the problem really is, and it's the first step of kind of digging into it. It also means that if you need to report the problem to IT support, to a plugin developer, to your custom developer or something like that, you can actually give them a detailed description, which for them will be hugely helpful, trust me. They love it. The more information you give them, the better. So if you've gone through this kind of process, you're able to give them clear information to get going. So I've found that once I've done that kind of process, there are a few, not standard, but there's a pathway of different types of problems that people run into with their sites. I've found that often you can diagnose the type of problem it is by how close they get to viewing the site. I'll show you that in a second. So the first point you reach where there's a problem is to do with domains. Domains and DNS problems are often when you'll see error messages like these ones, where the site can't be reached. It's just not there at all. This is in Chrome. It'll often show you DNS probe finished NX domain. That's a really specific error code that Chrome has. But it's basically saying it can't find the domain you're looking for. Oftentimes the first thing to check is that you haven't typed the domain in correctly, because that's what will happen if you type in a domain that just doesn't exist. But it can also mean that if you're sure that's your domain, maybe it's expired and you needed to renew it, or maybe there's an error in the configurations and settings somehow. So the next thing you want to do is to see if you can check your domain and DNS settings. Now to do this, eventually to make any changes to these, you would need to log into where you registered the domain. Whoever it was, maybe that might be the same place as where your site is hosted, but it could be somewhere different if you've, say, registered a domain with Crazy Domains, but your hosting is with Venture IP or something like that. They might be different places. But as a first step, it's actually possible to check the settings for your domain without logging in anywhere. It gives you a little bit of an idea. This website here, whatsmydns.net, I use this website probably 10 or 15 times a day. It's absolutely fantastic. It's kind of scary looking, but once you know what you're looking at, it's really, really helpful. What you do is you go to this site and you put in your domain into the search field, and you'll see there's a drop down there which is for the type of domain setting or domain record that it's referring to, but it will show you what the settings are for your domain all around the world. Now, this is my blog, and shortly before I took this screenshot, I actually made a change to my domain settings to break it a bit, and then changed it back. So what you're seeing here is that this is for the name servers. So this is, a name server will point you, all the traffic for the domain should go to this place. Basically, that's a really, really broad definition, but that's the basic idea. So what I want, because my site is hosted on WordPress.com, I want those ns1.wordpress.com name servers to be coming up all around the world for anyone to be able to view my site. You can see in Paris, Canada, in Seattle, that's not happening. It's got some broken setting or it's not coming up at all. Now what the likelihood is there is that anyone who tried to view my blog from those locations would be getting an error saying it didn't exist, or some weird oddity around it like that. In this instance, I know that I made the change recently, and changes like that can take kind of 12 to 24 hours to really update all around the world. So I know I've just got to wait. But that's one of the kind of things you might see. Another is this is a similar problem. This is again my blog. The A records are pointing you to a specific server. So rather than just saying your site's on WordPress.com, which is what the name server does, this is saying your site's on this specific server at this IP address. And similarly, you can see this was about 5 minutes later. It's updated in more places, but still in Seattle and then down in India as well. They would be having trouble loading my site because the settings for the domain are not quite right. So that's your first port of call, is to do something like that. Sorry, I'm just going to turn this PowerPoint on so the slides don't die. So we figured out that there might be some kind of problem there, but how do you actually fix it? Yeah, so first thing to check is log into your domain registrar and just check that your domain is actually still active. You get sent reminders if it doesn't renew automatically, but oftentimes if it's a domain you bought a while ago, those reminders are sent to some Hotmail address you don't always check, or perhaps it's related to something you did previously and it's not an email address you check regularly. You can also have a look at the settings in there. to see, just check that the name servers are pointing to your hosting. So where your website is hosted will be able to tell you the name servers that you need to use. You want to make sure that those match up. We see that when someone's been hosting a site somewhere else and they bring the domain to us and go, great, my domain's on WordPress.com, but it's still pointing over there. It's not pointing to us, it's pointing over there somewhere. And they wonder why their site isn't working. So that's the kind of thing we do there. All right. So say your site has now loaded. It's at least gotten to the domain seems to be working. The next thing that will pop up is some kind of 500 server error, PHP errors, when you see the white screen of death, which doesn't happen that often anymore. All these kinds of things are to do with the PHP on the server processing something incorrectly and not working. So you'll all, I'm sure, have seen this kind of error at some point when doing things. It's super vague and generic and tells you absolutely nothing except something didn't work. Or even better, you'll be in WP admin and it will just only load half of the content. It looks like it's kind of working, but it's not working as you expect. And depending on how things work with your hosting, or if you're doing things locally on your own computer, you might also see errors like this, where you actually get a little bit of information, but again, it's kind of gibberish. These are all essentially problems with PHP, which is, it runs on the server and it's what WordPress essentially sits on top of. It's something in the way that your site is being processed on the server before it gets displayed that is breaking. Now, in order to fix a lot of PHP problems, it can be helpful to have FTP access. Most of your hosts will allow that for you. What it means is that you see, rather than seeing the prettiness of your website, you see the file structure. So you'll see all of the files that make up your website, including the theme files and the plugin files. You might occasionally need that in order to remove plugins that are broken. You can change plugins and themes code directly on the server like that, but don't do it. It's one of those things. So since WordPress 5.2, so earlier this year, they introduced a new recovery mode, which is actually really, really brilliant. It's the reason that it will be very rare for you to ever see the white screen where just nothing loads. Very often you won't even see those 500 errors, the generic error that I showed up first. What happens when your site goes in, has recovery mode, if someone tries to load the site and there is a plugin or a theme or some kind of issue that makes the site not work, they'll at least see a neat but boring page that tells them something's wrong. If you're the site owner, you get a login link, which logs you into recovery mode. And it also sends an email to whoever the site administrator is. So in your settings general, there's a site admin email. Whatever is set in that will get notifications when something has broken, and actually gives you a little bit of detail as to what plugin it might have been that caused the problem so that you can deactivate it. Now, if you click the login to admin backend to fix this link, you'll be able to log in like normal, which is good, because otherwise you might not be able to when things are broken. And what it does is it loads you in this recovery mode, where it automatically disables the plugin that was causing the problem. So you at least can get into your site still and make changes to either troubleshoot or try and fix what the problem is. So this is really, really handy. It's a good reason to check what your admin email is in WordPress. Good news is, as soon as you update to 5.3, which came out this week, you'll get a prompt to check your admin email. They've started making that more important because it's getting notifications. Okay, so you've established there's some kind of PHP problem. That's still a little bit scary. How do we find what it is, and how do we fix it? So we need to find what the actual error is. To kind of, again, we're drilling down to get into more detail of what the problem is. One place you can find that is in your error log. Again, if you've got FTP access, a lot of the times there'll be a file on your server called error.log. If you open it up, it'll look something like this. Super helpful. You may also be able to find it if you've got cPanel. Sometimes they reveal the error logs, or your host otherwise. I know WP Engine will let you view error logs through their admin area. You can usually get access to the PHP errors, but it's still a little bit confusing. We'll get to that in a second. One thing you can do if you have FTP access is you can turn debugging on in your browser. So if you go to your FTP access and you edit the WP config file, you're able to add a couple of lines here which will start to show the error messages actually in the browser when you load the page. If you search for WordPress debugging, you'll find like 100 gazillion posts that people have written about how to turn it on. It's super easy. You just probably only want to do it for sites that are super low traffic or hobby sites. You wouldn't put it on a production site that's getting lots and lots of traffic because everyone's going to see all your errors. So what you would get is you get this situation where it loads some of the page, and then when the error has occurred, it actually gives us the information of what's happened. Again, kind of gibberish unless you work on understanding what's going on. So here is an example of one of those errors. This is an actual error in a site of mine. And again, when you look at that, on the whole, it's really easy for your eyes to just kind of glaze over and not be sure how to attack it. The good news is there's a few important parts we can pull out. First thing is we can see that it's a fatal error. What that means is a fatal error is something that just stops everything straight away. PHP is working trying to build the site. If it hits a fatal error, it will just stop. That's why you might see no content. It's why you might see part of the content and then it stops altogether because it's hit an error and it just gives up. It is possible to also get warnings, which are warning you that something is not right, but it keeps processing things. When it's a fatal error, it just stops everything altogether. Next, it tells us what the error is. It says there's a call to an undefined function, comments templated. Now, there's a little bit of a clue there as to what the problem might be. But essentially, when it's saying there's a call to an undefined function, it means it's looking for a function of code, something there has said, hey, do this thing. And when it's gone to find that thing to do, it's looked everywhere, behind the couch, under the cushions, everywhere. It can't find that bit of code to actually do. And then we also have these bits. The top one is saying, this is where it's said to try and do this function. So this is on our server in app, public, WP content, themes, 2019, single.php is where it's tried to use this comments template function. So that has helped us narrow down the kind of problem it is, and it's actually even narrowed down to the particular file where the problem is occurring. And we can look there and we can go, okay, it's in the 2019 theme, and it's the single page template. So anytime, well, single post template rather. So anytime someone is viewing a post on my site, this error is probably occurring because it's in that particular template file. So again, we've narrowed it down from it's a PHP error, oh, it's trying to call a function, it's trying to do something that doesn't exist, and it's happening in that particular file. At that point, it helps to know kind of what some of the common PHP errors you might find are. Let's be honest, when you see this error, the first thing you can do is go copy fatal error, uncaught error, call to undefined function, and paste it into Google, and you'll find out what it means. But if you want to know in advance, there's a few common ones. So call to undefined function is that one that I was talking about, where part of the PHP code is saying, do this thing, which is defined somewhere, and it's looked for that definition and it can't find it. In this instance, it's because there's a spelling mistake. If you have a look at the comments template, it's a fairly clear spelling mistake. The comments template function is actually a core WordPress function that does exist all the time unless you've inserted a typo in there on purpose. So that's a clue as to what's going on, and you can see what's starting to happen. So call to undefined function. Parse error, syntax error, unexpected, curly bracket, unexpected anything really. You can have all sorts of things in there. This is what happens when there's a problem with the coding of a theme or a plugin. Someone's got some text in there that's not meant to be there. Well, it's unexpected. And so PHP doesn't know what to do with it, so it just takes its bat and ball and goes home. Fatal error, allowed memory size of that many bytes has been exhausted. Who's seen this one before anywhere? A few of you. This is the one that happens when the PHP is working really hard at doing something, and it's working really hard and really hard and really hard, and then it just gives up because it's all too hard. Essentially. Your server has a set amount of memory that is dedicated to doing this processing, and if it runs out, it just can't keep going. This is something you'll often see when you activate a new plugin or activate a new theme, or sometimes when you're publishing a post when you have a lot of plugins activated, it can happen. It often comes down to, it can be to do with your server not having enough memory, and you can talk to your host about having that allowance bumped up. More often than not, it's to do with inefficiently or poorly coded plugins that are doing things in a bad way. There's an efficient way to do it, they're doing it inefficiently, and so it just can't cope. Fatal error, cannot redeclare function. This is the opposite of the undeclared function problem. This is what happens when the function exists, so that our comments template function exists, and then someone else had said, hey, I've got a function over here called comment templates. And the problem is that it's got two of them and it doesn't know which one to resolve to, so it decides to use neither. This can often happen, again, if a plugin is using kind of generic names for things, it can conflict with another one. It's when you see plugin conflicts and theme conflicts, you'll activate something and it conflicts with something that's already active. And again, in that kind of instance, it will tell you where the conflict is. It will tell you both of them usually. It'll tell you the file that it was first declared in and the file that was trying to declare it again, which means you can have a look at those two plugins or the theme and the plugin and decide which one you actually want to use, because you're not going to be able to use both of them. Warning, cannot modify header information, headers already sent. This is usually to do with, again, it's poorly coded themes or plugins. It's usually to do with some extra white space in files. So if someone's got like literally just a space bar in their file in the wrong place, it can make everything fall apart. But these are, you'd be able to research these a little bit more further if you ran into the problem. And again, being able to say to a developer or a contractor or whoever you're working with, this is what I was doing and this is the error I got, that gets them 90% of the way there towards figuring out how to fix it, because they don't have to do that digging themselves. So figured out the PHP problem, what do we do? Switch the theme. If the theme has a problem, the first thing you can do is switch to 2019 or 2020. The site's not going to look how you want, but at least it will work. And then you can work back from there. Similarly, you can deactivate the problem plugin. I know we don't like to deactivate plugins because they do stuff we like, but if it's causing an error, we need to deactivate it. And then you can figure out whether you can find an alternative, or you talk to a developer to get a fix, or what you want to do, but at least your site is up and running again. You could try and edit the problem file. Again, if you've got FTP access, that's possible. If it's something like that error that I had where there's a spelling mistake, you might be safe to give that kind of thing a try, but generally, I'd avoid it. If you can't narrow down what the problem is and it looks like it's a conflict between things, you used to have to deactivate everything and then turn things on one by one until something broke again. And you had this kind of trial and error process for figuring out what was wrong. The good news is now that this plugin, the health check plugin, allows you to still kind of do that, but you don't break your site for everyone, you only break it for yourself. When you activate this troubleshooting mode that the plugin allows, it means that you can deactivate everything and see what works and doesn't work, but you don't break it for everyone in the public who views your site. They'll still see the site as it's meant to be, while you're able to troubleshoot kind of behind the scenes. Okay, so the domain's loaded. We're not seeing any PHP errors. What's going to be the next thing you see? Problems with CSS and JavaScript. This is when the site's loaded, but things aren't quite looking right. CSS problems will be to do with things being out of place, like the layout is broken. Form elements might look ugly or misaligned or out of place. Maybe you have elements overlapping, your menu disappears behind the content or things like that. These are all the kinds of things that CSS would be handling. JavaScript problems are usually to do more with interaction and things that happen magically after the page is already loaded. So it'd be dynamic elements not appearing, like maybe you've got Twitter widgets or Facebook widgets that don't load. It could be to do with interactions not working, like if you've got a pop-up that happens when you click, like a light box for images or something like that. If they're not working, it's usually related to JavaScript. It's all of these kinds of dynamic interactive things that happen with JavaScript. The great thing about troubleshooting them is that all modern browsers have got tools built into them that you can use to start troubleshooting this stuff. If you're using Chrome or Safari or Firefox, some versions of Explorer have them, but they're a little bit less helpful. I'd usually err towards using Chrome or Firefox or Safari for these tools, which again help you to see some of the errors that are occurring. So you'll notice these all look pretty similar. This is, I think, they look so similar that I can't actually tell. Chrome, I think. I know that was Safari, Firefox, Chrome. You could see in all of these instances we've got the actual page on the left-hand side, and over the right-hand side you're actually seeing the code that is, just the code that is making the page up, essentially. So this is after the PHP has worked, it's spat out the page, and this is the code for it, along with a bunch of extra information like some layout information and the styles and those different types of things. Now the cool thing about this is we can inspect elements to drill down to what the problem really is. So if I know I've got an element on the page that's in the wrong place and I want to find out what the problem is with that particular thing, that title, that heading, that whatever it is, I can click, this is, my examples are all in Chrome, but the others work similarly. Click this little button up the top with the red square around it, and that's going to let me select a particular part of the page. So you can see here, this is for WordCamp Auckland that was on 2 weeks ago. I've got here the main heading element I've selected. Now when I've selected that, I've got some information up the top there about its styling. I can see overlaid the margins and the padding of this element, and over on the right-hand side here, I've got all of the styles that are applied to that element. So it's all the information about what it is, where it is, and why it looks the way it does. So what that lets us do is see the CSS over here. So you can see I've now gone to this list. Up the top there, it shows me what element it is. It's a table row, and then down the bottom, it tells me the styles that are applied to it. So it's got a border, it's got a whole bunch of other information about it I can see quite specifically. The even better news is that what you can do in this kind of view is you can start to tweak things and play with them. So if I want to, this will be just for me while I'm looking at this, it's not going to affect it for anyone else. I can decide to add some CSS code to change things live and on the fly. This is literally something that I would do tens of times a day when someone needs a CSS fix. The first thing that I do is I open up the Chrome Inspector and I start writing the CSS for them, previewing it so only I see it, make sure it works, and then I would give it to them to use. So this is a great way to tinker with making things look a bit different. You do need to remember that any CSS that you write there, you've got to actually put into the site, either in the customizer or a theme settings or somewhere else. This is only going to be until you refresh the page next time. It's just for right now. We can check JavaScript errors. When the page loads, if there are JavaScript errors, you'll see up in the top right-hand side there, we've got 1 X and 2 warnings. These are the specific errors that are occurring that might be stopping interactive elements from working. When you click them, it opens up the actual error list so that we can see them. In the same way as we saw the PHP errors, we don't have to go digging quite so hard for JavaScript. We can see it right here in the browser. So this is the error here. In this instance, it's saying an uncaught reference error, the response is not defined, which again, is kind of vague and weird. But let's have a look at some common JavaScript problems really quickly while I wrap up. Uncaught reference error, jQuery is not defined. jQuery is a package of JavaScripts that lots and lots of themes and plugins lean on to make their life easier. But it can also be used at the wrong time. So sometimes your plugins or themes might be trying to do something when the framework it's using to do it is not ready yet. That's when you'll see this kind of thing. It can be to do with plugin conflicts or things being kind of set up incorrectly by your theme. You might see type error undefined is not a function. This is another thing where, similar to the no function, it's trying to do something but it can't find what it's meant to do. So it's to do with maybe, this often happens when you have, if you've bought something, say from ThemeForest, which is a theme and a plugin, and they both have to be active, when you deactivate the plugin, it's still looking for stuff from there and it's not finding it. That's often when you'll run into that kind of problem. cannot read property length. That's often to do with when it's looking for something on the page. So it's looking for a particular element to make changes to, like your header or a particular div, and it can't find it on the page. What do we do then? Similar situation, I'll go back a couple of seconds real quickly. We can see here with this error, it also tells us the file that the error is occurring in, and we can see again the path to it. So this one is in WP Content plugins, so it's a plugin. WP Church Center is the plugin, and it's somewhere in there. So we've narrowed it down to the specific plugin that has the problem, which helps us when we get here because we can deactivate that plugin or theme. We can contact the developer and see what they say. Oftentimes optimization plugins like WP Optimize and things which minify JavaScripts can cause problems because they decide on the order things should be stacked together in, and often they get it wrong. Edit the file, don't do it, but you could. Speed and loading problems, I'll do this real quick. In the inspector here as well, when you go to the network tab, it will show you all the different assets that load for your site and how long they take. So when you reload the page, it'll load all these things over the right-hand side to tell you how big they are, how long they took to load. It's great for tracking down when you've got a 5 megabyte image as a background somewhere. We're just slowing your whole site down. So that's it. Now you know how to troubleshoot.
Thank you, Jordan. So we've got a couple of moments. Is anyone, if you've got some questions, we've got a microphone here that we can run around to you. Don't let Jordan off easily. Give him some curly as you can. You can punch me later.
If I can't answer it now, come and find me after.
Sorry, I'm going to break your first rule and give you not a curly question, a basic one. The last screen that you showed up, the speed with the right-hand side. Sorry, very basic. How do I get to see that on my site?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so loading any of these tools you can find from the View menu of your browser. Lots of them are also toggled by just hitting F12. I know definitely Chrome and Safari open it up. If you hit F12 while you're in your browser, it'll pop out these developer tools. In the instance of the network speed one, you actually have to select the little network tab. The full screen mode is not showing the whole, oh no, there. So by default, it'll load with the Elements tab selected, at least for Chrome. You'll need to click on the network one, but then you'll need to reload the page. So it actually will check everything as you reload. And it will be specific to your browser connection as well. So if you're tethering on 3G or something like that, you're gonna see slower speed. It's not the same as doing a site speed test with Pingdom or GTmetrix or anything like that.
Thanks for that. That was really, really useful. I just had a question about the browser developer tools and whether there is any huge difference between Chrome or Safari developer tools, or if you would use them at different times, or are they exactly the same?
That's a good question. I use Chrome because it's what I use. Each of the browser vendors do try and put different features into their developer tools to try and get people using them, basically. Firefox particularly has had a bunch of advancements recently, and they've got a lot more, you can get a lot more information and control about layout and stuff, I guess, when you're looking at CSS and those kinds of things. I haven't actually played with them yet because I'm so busy just doing it that I haven't had time to play with a new toy. But generally speaking, I've found Chrome and Safari to be pretty similar. They might have slight differences in how they kind of allow you to edit things or check things, but it's kind of a matter of preference.
I have a comment on my technique. I add a step after you've established the DNS is working.
Yes.
But before trying to load, if the PHP fails, I try and load readme.html because that bypasses lots of things, and if that's working, you know that your basic server's healthy.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually really clever. I like that.
And it also might tell you that you've got htaccess problems or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't like having a readme HTML there, I load up a very simple file that I call kittens.html that loads up photos of kittens so that there's no security problem there or vulnerability that I might be launching on in my
That's
site.
really clever. I like that. I'm going to use that. So that's a really good suggestion. What it means is that on your server, WordPress runs on PHP, which means it does all of that processing to work. But HTML pages, which some of you may have used a long, long time ago or more recently, don't do any of that processing. They just work automatically in the browser. So the suggestion is that if you have access, the WordPress comes with a readme.html file at your domain /readme.html. But you could also add your own file in there, which would allow you to check that, yes, the server is definitely, the domain is definitely working because I can see this file, and then you can go to the next step of seeing if it's a PHP error or an htaccess error, which I didn't talk about. Last question?
Yeah, it was just a tip. So yeah, you can use web developer tools or GTmetrix to measure the speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I generally use GTmetrix. It has like a waterfall breakdown of like which scripts are taking the longest, or images, and you can compress images with a plugin called Imagify. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. GTmetrix, which is just GTmetrix with an X.com, is actually a really, really great tool for, it actually gives you more information on your kind of site speed, and it pulls in information from a few sources, and it will similarly tell you what assets are taking a long time to load and make some recommendations. So that's a really good tool to use as well.
Jordan, we just have one more down the front here, if that's okay.
It's fine by me if it's fine with you.
Thanks, great presentation, thank you.
Thanks.
Look, I came across an issue that I'm about to troubleshoot now. I haven't looked into in the log yet, but it's where the search results inside bbPress comes up with some entries on how many search results are found, but there's no content. So there are no errors. I looked in Inspector and so on.
Yeah.
So my next step is the log. But if there was nothing in the log, are there any other areas that you would recommend that might surface some clues about that type of error?
Sure. So the kind of thing, so if it's loading something saying it's found search results, but there's no search results being shown, my gut feel is that there will be a PHP error in the log. So that kind of thing, I wouldn't expect there to be a JavaScript error in the browser. I'd expect there to be something in the log that's stopping it from displaying those results. If it were me, I'd have a tinker and edit the file on my own machine and see if I can get it to spit out the results in some other fashion. Otherwise, I'd be suggesting either bbPress is community built, so it's tough to get immediate advice on that. But if you've got other plugins that might be interacting with it, you could talk to the developer of that. My hope would be that you'd have a PHP error that would help you dig a little bit deeper into it.
Thank you.
That's right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause for Jordan. Thank you.